Welcome to another episode of Automotive Insiders. I'm your host, Jason Stein. Great to have you back listening again with us. Today, we're tackling one of the most consequential topics shaping the auto industry right now, the intersection of tariffs, pricing, and performance, and how shifting policy decisions are influencing everything from vehicle affordability to long-term manufacturing strategy. As trade tensions rise and new tariffs on EVs, batteries, and key components come into focus, automakers and suppliers are being forced to rethink where and how they build. Costs are moving, sourcing is changing, and the consumer is beginning to feel the ripple effects in showrooms across the country. So, what does it all mean for the U.S. market and for the brands trying to stay competitive in a global economy that's anything but predictable? To help answer those questions today, I'm joined by David Oakley, Manager, America's Vehicle Sales Forecasts at Global Data. He will break down all of the trade policies that are reshaping vehicle pricing, incentive strategy, and market share dynamics, and what signals there are for 2026. All coming up on Automotive Insiders. David Oakley, what a pleasure to have you on the program. Thanks for being on Automotive Insiders.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. It's good to be here.
We've talked on this program all year about tariffs and the impact that tariffs are having or likely to have on the U.S. auto industry. What's your view on the current or proposed tariffs and how they're affecting the industry?
Yeah, so I think my view is really probably one that a lot of people in the industry are sharing, in that we really haven't seen as much impact as of yet, on sales at least, in the US as we might have expected. There really has been a sense that OEMs are absorbing a lot of the costs that they're seeing in the supply chain, and they're not really passing that on to consumers too much at this point. But I do think we're at the point where this is probably likely to start changing a little bit. We've obviously seen a lot of different dynamics at play in the market recently, with the ending of EV tax credits as well. So that's another factor that's in the mix. But yeah, we haven't necessarily seen those sort of multi-$1,000 price increases that we might have expected had that full cost being passed on to consumers. But and that's not to say that there isn't lots of other impacts going on throughout the supply chain. I know that people are certainly struggling with constantly changing policy. But at an overall kind of top line total industry volume level, the market's actually been pretty resilient through the first 3 quarters of this year.
Fascinating. Did you expect that OEMs would absorb those costs the way they have?
To be honest with you, no. When we
Hmm.
were first kind of modeling this back in March and April, when these tariffs were first being announced, we were expecting a much more significant pass through, maybe in the region of a sort of a 75% pass through, and then 25% absorption. But it's really been, if anything, it's been sort of flipped. It's been almost the other way around. We are seeing some increases now in pricing. We're seeing, even things like increases in destination fees, that kind of thing, as kind of a backdoor way to increase pricing. But overall, as we see 2026 model year vehicles come in, that is always an opportunity to increase pricing, but that's kind of normal in any year. And what we're seeing is tending to be in the region of, maybe a few $100s here, maybe $1,000 there. I think if we were seeing the full pass through of these tariffs, it would be more in the range of sort of $3,000 to $4,000 on a typically priced vehicle, and we're just not really seeing that. So yeah, it has been surprising the extent to which OEMs have really been able to kind of hold the line on that.
And in the ultra luxury or the luxury segments, I know that exactly what you described has been happening. That the OEMs have absorbed most of those price increases, which are phenomenally large relative to the profit margins. How does that go for 26?
Well, we do expect there to be a little bit more pass through as we head into 2026. across the industry, really. Now that could be it could be offset to a certain extent by some factors that we're seeing in terms of things like potentially some lower interest rates coming through, so that could keep monthly payments a little bit more affordable from a consumer point of view. But certainly, we do expect a pullback in incentives and an increase in average transaction prices as we go through 2026. So, I mean, we really have been seeing that as OEMs start to report their financial results for Q3, we continue to see a pretty significant impact on profits from the tariffs. Now, obviously, the ability of OEMs to absorb that and to take that hit to profits is going to vary depending on their circumstances. There's some OEMs that are going to be more exposed than others, depending on size, depending on their sort of profile of imports versus domestically produced vehicles. So, but at some point, we do expect there to be the need to really take a little bit of a different course on pricing than what we've seen so far in 2025.
What do you see happening in terms of manufacturer incentives, rebates, lease deals?
Yeah, so in terms of manufacturing incentives, what we've really seen, to put this in historical context, what we've seen over the last few years is that obviously during the inventory crisis and the chip crisis in sort of 21, 22, incentives really fell to an extremely low level, maybe around $1,000 on average per vehicle. They've since gone up significantly. We're looking at around $3,000 on average today. However, having said that, it's looking like from the data that we're going to see in October, we could be down around $500 month over month. Now, some of that is EV related distortion, so shouldn't read too much into that. But I do think we could see incentives go down quite significantly next year as OEMs find just ways to recoup some of the costs that they're seeing. In terms of leasing, that's an interesting one. Obviously, again, with the EV issue, a lot of due to the terms of the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of EVs were sold through leases, disproportionately in recent years. That was where EVs were being sold through those lease deals. Now, with that having gone away, that's obviously going to have a little bit of a negative impact on leasing as a percentage of the total market. But on the other hand, what we saw, historically also comes into play, because back in 2022, leasing really took a major hit when we saw the inventory crisis. Then obviously sales were down overall, and given that those leases tend to be 36 months, you're going to see people coming back into the market in 2026 to a greater extent than they were in 2025, just because of the historical pattern of 2023 being a stronger year than 2022. So in terms of the actual deals out there, I'm not sure there's going to be as many bargains, particularly on the EV side of the market, as there maybe were. But there's just going to be some pretty competing forces there. But I do think that maybe we might see more of a shift back towards the sort of more traditional financing model once again in 2026.
And David, vehicle affordability has been such a hot topic for the last number of years. It's a real sore point, and there's the theory that really entry level or even just, middle class buyers are being boxed out of the market for to some extent. What's your view on that, and how does it change relative to everything that we've just talked about?
Yeah, it's certainly a big concern. Like you said, it has been for some time. I don't really see that changing in the foreseeable future. I think it's still going to be a major concern. I mean, even before tariffs, you still had a number of pressures that were putting the consumer, making affordability even more of a challenge, whether that be things like labor costs, whether that be increases in insurance or technological improvements and things like that, which were just pushing up the price of vehicles. So it is certainly a major concern. Obviously, with the tariffs, that does put even more pressure on it. I do think it still seems like, at least in the short term, there's going to be some you know, entry-level vehicles that may be a little bit more on the affordable side of things. I mean, even on the EV side, we're seeing, potentially some new models coming out next year. Something like, the Chevy Bolt, the new Nissan Leaf, that in theory are going to be priced around $30,000. So, and obviously you're going to have potentially with some of the relaxation of emissions regulations and things like that, there is the possibility that OEMs could pivot back towards more affordable kind of entry-level vehicles with fewer concerns about emissions regulations, that sort of thing. And also perhaps we could see a trend towards more decontented vehicles, whereby people are looking for more of a simple, like you said, entry-level vehicle, not so many bells and whistles, but perhaps priced at a more affordable level. So I do think we're still obviously going to see a spectrum. I think overall average transaction prices will creep up, as we've been saying. We're already at 46K. According to JD Power data, it could be easily 48, 49K in a year or two. But I still think that there is an opening there for OEMs to potentially take advantage of those buyers that are just looking for something a little bit more simple and a little bit more affordable.
So, final thing, as we look into the next year, into 26, what happens? Let's talk scenarios. What happens if tariffs increase, decrease, or remain in place? And maybe what's the broader implications for the industry as a whole?
Yeah, so I think it's worth stating where we are with our forecasts. So we're currently looking at around a 16 million unit year next year, which would actually be pretty much in line with where we're looking at this year. And I know that may be slightly more optimistic than maybe some would expect, but I think we are assuming in that there could be a little bit of a lowering of tariffs, at least coming out of the USMCA review next year. We're currently assuming that some of those vehicles that are produced in Canada and Mexico and would comply with the USMCA, the tariffs on the non-US content could be cut from the current 25% to maybe somewhere around half of that, maybe 12.5%. So that's kind of our assumption, that during 2026 we do start to see a little bit of relief on that. Obviously, we're seeing a few movements to try and ease some of the pain on manufacturers building vehicles within the US as well from the administration. So that's our kind of baseline assumption. Obviously, if tariffs were to increase, I think we would obviously see a hit on sales. I think somewhere around sort of maybe 15.2 to 15.5 million would be a more realistic scenario. If those tariffs were to decrease in a more substantial way than we foresee, maybe you're looking at 16.3, 16.5, somewhere around there. But to be honest, I think it does seem like we're pretty sort of settled in with these tariffs. I don't think we're necessarily going to see too much movement, at least outside of the USMCA. But we'll obviously have to wait and see. In terms of the impact on the wider industry, I think I'm always impressed by the ability of the industry to adapt to changing circumstances. I think this is in one sense, it feels like the news brings a new challenge every day. We're certainly seeing that, not just with tariffs, but with some of the kinks in the supply chain that have been in the news in the last couple of weeks, and not to mention things like a shifting picture regarding electrification. But I do think on the one hand, it's changing very rapidly, but on the other hand, OEMs are very good at seeing things coming, and we've had 7 or 8 months now of a tariff kind of situation playing out. And I think as we go through next year, I am expecting OEMs and suppliers to really come up with some pretty smart ways of spreading costs, of becoming more efficient. And I think my hope, at least, is that there is that ability to adapt and to continue to survive even in a very challenging environment.
Wonderful. David, we appreciate you sharing your thoughts on the end of this year, your forecast, and the year ahead. And I'm sure we'll all be watching very closely for some of the trends that you identified. Thank you for being on the program.
Great. Thank you, Jason.
A big thanks to my guest again, Global Data's David Oakley. And thank you for listening to the program on your favorite podcast platform. I'm your host, Jason Stein. We'll see you again next time.